So before I start, who has Riot Games and League of Legends or played League of Legends before today? Call a few people. Those of you who play, I've got some skin code cards, so if you want to grab some afterwards, come and speak to me. But thanks for coming to my talk. I'm going to be talking about essentially the work that I've been doing for 12 months since I joined Riot last January. Really my main focus when I joined Riot was to turn what we had in place for AppSec into a world-class application security program. Now this is only 12 months later, so obviously we're not there yet. But I wanted to talk about some of the things we've done in those first 12 months to try and get us to that kind of XC kind of AppSec program. So I'm not going to talk in detail about where we want to be. Go and see talks like the one that we're very lucky at this conference if you want to see where we want to be. I'm going to talk to you about how we're trying to get there and what we've done in the past 12 months to try and get there. So I want to start off with a bit of an introduction to Riot and the game itself, because by understanding a bit more about the culture of Riot Games and the game itself and the scale of it, I think you'll understand a little bit more about how we approach security at Riot, how we make certain decisions and the scale that we work with. Then I'll talk about Riot AppSec, so that's the majority of the talk, and it's really talking about, from when I joined nearly 12 months ago, so in 3 days time was 12 months, but nearly 12 months, what I did first, and what we did before we had a Christmas break in December. And then I'll give you a few recommendations that I think could help you. So firstly, myself, I'm David Rook, I'm a security engineer at Riot. And as I said, I mainly focus on AppSec and trying to build our AppSec program. I'm based in our office in Dublin, in Ireland. Our security team is spread across the world, and I'll touch on that a little bit later on. I've worked in application security for 9 years and in IT for 15 years. Most of my AppSec experience was in the financial services world, mainly in payment providers, so I had lots of fun with PCI for 8 years before I joined Riot. And I play a lot of games. Like everyone at Riot, we all play a lot of computer games. I'm not very good at the games that are probably important, like League of Legends. I'm okay at some other games. So Riot is a developer and a publisher of a game called League of Legends. League of Legends, even though quite a lot of you haven't heard of it, is actually the most played computer game in the world. And I'll talk about a few statistics on that in a minute, but it's played by a lot of people all around the world. So one of the things we do as a company is make sure that we focus on the player experiences first. And so that changes how you think about security, because rather than talking about security controls or vulnerabilities in terms of XYZ compliance requirement or X amount of $1 million lost if we don't do this, we think of it in terms of what does this mean to a person playing our game or visiting our web properties. If we have a cross-site scripting vulnerability in that website, what does that mean to someone who's playing the game or visiting LeagueofLegends.com? We don't talk of it in terms of money or compliance requirements. We think about what it means to the player. And so we've got rioters all around the world. I think the stats on this are already out of date because we've grown so fast. But the things that you saw kind of blinking at the top is where our security team is spread. So we have security in Santa Monica, literally 5 minutes from here where our headquarters are. We have security in St. Louis. We have one who works remotely in Austin. And then the rest of our security team is in Dublin and in Seoul, in South Korea. You can see that we've got a lot of rioters all around the world. We've got a lot of offices. Actually, as I said, it's out of date, so even there's a couple of offices that are not on that slide, and there's more than 1,500 by a long way now. But the point is, we're going fast, we've got a lot of people all around the world. Now, from an AppSec point of view, what does that mean? Well, it means that we have people writing code in various different ways, with various different product types all around the world. And they speak and work in different languages, not just spoken languages, which is kind of obvious from looking at that, but our engineers use a lot of different languages and frameworks, close to 20 different languages, and then a lot of different frameworks and combinations. So we'll touch on how we try and approach secure coding guidance for all of those things a little bit later on. And as I said, as a company, we aspire to be the most player-focused game company in the world. And so that does change about how we think about security, how we think about the controls we do and don't implement, and how we fix or don't fix, maybe in some cases, certain security vulnerabilities. So the game itself has been around since 2009. It's a MOBA game, a multiplayer online battle arena. The quick TLDR on it is 2 teams of 5, either you and friends or the people you're matched with, and you fight from one side of the map against each other. You break down turrets and buildings and kill the enemy champions. You get to their base, you destroy them, you're the winner. Okay, so it sounds a very simple game. It can actually be quite complex and quite tricky to figure out to play, but it appeals to a lot of people. So these stats are about a year old, and you can see from last January we had about 70 million people every month play the game. And really, I'm not going to go through those in detail. The point is that even though a lot of people might not have heard of Riot Games or League of Legends, like we saw when I asked at the start of this talk, we've got our software on, if you consider the people who play and people who maybe don't play anymore, on probably like 100 million people's computers around the world. And that's before we even consider the web properties we have, like leagueoflegends.com, lolesports.com. Esports is something I'm going to talk about in a second. So we deal with a pretty huge scale when it comes to who is using our products and our services, and then we need to figure out how do we make sure all of those are secure. One of the other really important things that people might not be familiar with is this concept of esports. Has anyone seen any esports before or know what it is? Call a few people. I really like esports. I was at the LCS, for those who watch League of Legends. I went to the studio, which is actually just up the road here. It's a TV studio that we filmed and broadcast our North American professional games from. But this picture here is actually the FIFA World Cup stadium in Seoul that was built for the 2002 World Cup. And they're not all there for a concert or anything like that. That stadium was filled with people who came to watch the League of Legends World Championship in October last year. So around about 40,000 people in the stadium to watch the final. Two teams play for the final to become world champions. And around about 30 million people watch the final online. So what does that mean from a security point of view? It sounds impressive, but what does that mean to us as a security team? Well, in other esports, and I'm not going to name any names, people who know esports or everyone can use Google, you can probably figure out who I'm talking about. Other esports have had problems with, they maybe haven't proved that professional players have cheated in games, but there's certainly a lot of suspicious things that have happened in games that look like professional teams have cheated. So if we've got 30 million people watching our world final and someone cheats in it, someone's going to see it, right? Or even if it looks like someone might have been able to cheat. And that can undermine the integrity of esports as a whole for League of Legends. And it's a big thing, right? You've got those people there in the stadium, but every single week in China, in South Korea, in Europe, in Germany, and just up the road here in LA, hundreds of people go along to watch the LCS, or the OGM as it's called in other parts of the world. But that's like the regional leagues to get to the World Championship. So it's a good thing. And so as part of our security remit, we want to make sure that everything that happens from an esports point of view is secure as well. So now that you know a little bit more about Riot, I want to talk about our AppSec efforts and what we try to do over the past year. So in the game, we have lots of different champions, and you're going to see lots of different artwork during this because, well, I couldn't make my slides look as cool without it, so I borrowed a lot of artwork from the game. And this guy on the screen now is called Brawl, and he's what we call a support champion within the game. And basically what he does is he goes into a part of the map with someone who eventually will get really strong and do all the damage to the opposition, do all the good stuff. But at the start, that champion needs to be looked after, kind of developed, and then you set them free to go and do all the crazy damage. And so we'd like to think of ourselves a little bit like a support champion for our engineers. That we will work closely with engineers and engineering teams to give them everything they need to write secure code, and then eventually they shouldn't need us. They can go off and produce those secure applications and services without us. And then we move on to the next person that needs us to be their support champion. So we work very closely with our engineering teams in Riot to make sure that they have everything they need to write secure code. And hopefully most of the time be able to write secure code without needing us at all. So as I said, we have writers writing code all around the world, many different languages, writing many different types of products. And so how do we try and help them with that? How do we try and make sure that they're enabled to go and write secure code without us? Well, so the first thing that I did when I got there, and again, another League of Legends comparison, because normally one of the first things, I guess the first thing I did when I got there, in the boring financial services world where I came from, we normally call it gap analysis, right? Find out what things we do and don't do from an AppSec point of view. I think that's a little bit boring, Mr. Term, so I wanted to compare it to League of Legends, because it is kind of similar. So when you start a game in League of Legends, you can't see everything. So this is the map that you play on. Five at that side you fight against each other. When you start the game, you can't see all of the map. Parts of it are kind of, grayed out, I guess, is one way to put it. You can't see them. And it was a bit like that when I joined right, I could see little bits of our AppSec program, and I knew some things we were doing, but I didn't know everything. So in the game, you place these things called wards, and it gives you visibility. Now, I called them AppSec wards at the top, but it's nowhere near as exciting as it probably sounds. It's just a lot of meetings, a lot of listening to people, meeting with engineering teams or individual engineers, and just saying, look, what hasn't worked for you when it comes to AppSec and right in the past? And then sitting down with them saying, look, this is what we're trying to build from an AppSec point of view. These are things we're trying to do. How can we help you do that? What is it that you need from us to enable you to write secure code? And so by doing this first, we were able to figure out, well, okay, these are the things we need to prioritize and work on throughout the year. And what you'll see on this slide is pretty much the things we did in 2014. Now, they are pretty much in order. And you might look at it and think, well, when you think RFC, you can basically think of that as standards. And training is training, right? And so you might look at that and think, well, why did you leave standards and training until nearly the end of the year? There was a reason for that. I think if you try and do those kind of things first, before you have a better understanding of AppSec in your organization, or a better understanding of what your engineering teams need from you, then you're doing it wrong. So I'm going to talk about, in the rest of this, for the first part of the talk, the things we did to learn about our engineering requirements in Riot, and what it is we could give them when it comes to training and in terms of standards to enable them to write that secure code. So the first thing was goals. We went to the engineering department and we said, look, these are our 5 AppSec goals, and I'm going to show you them on the next slide. But the reason we did that is we felt that setting those goals and publicizing them was kind of the first step in making the invisible into the visible. That we're saying to people, look, we want to build this AppSec program, this is what we're going to do for you, now you can hold us accountable against those goals. And we can do that. When we sat down to write our roadmap for 2015, we did it by looking back at these goals and saying, what is it that we're going to do in 2015 that can help us make these things real? So, as I said, we published that to the whole of engineering. Well, actually, the way we published it was to the whole company. But the thing is that any engineer that wanted to see this, and every engineer we've engaged with since then, knows what we're trying to do for them, knows how we're trying to help them. And from our point of view, I don't really care what type of code they're writing, whether it's that game that's on like 100 million computers possibly around the world. It could be the League of Legends website, it could be the esports website where people go and watch those live games, or even mobile content, or whatever it might be. To me, it's just a riot for writing code. I want to make sure that they have everything they need to be able to do it securely. And so you'll see, I'm not going to bore you by stepping through each one of these individuals, but those are our 5 AppSec goals that we published to the organization. Now, the bit in red at the top is really the most important bit. That the thing that we want to do is to make it easier to write secure code. Okay? And so we have security engineers around the world working with different software engineers around the world, writing those different types of products, those different languages, and so on. What we want those engineers to remember whenever they do those engagements is, are the things you're doing with that team going to make it easier for them to write secure code? If it isn't, you're not doing the right thing. And for those of you who are, like maybe have a military background or maybe familiar with the concept of like a commander's intent, where you don't have to set those rigid plans, you kind of have that high level, this is what you should always try and achieve. You figure out in your region with your engineers how exactly you're going to do that. But don't try and set like a real rigid set of things that you want to do. Just make it clear that we want to make it easier for engineers to write secure code. You figure out how, with your specific team, or the team you're embedded with, or the team you're working with, how that's going to happen. And we're not going to give you very specific things to go out and try and implement. So after we set goals, we focused on community. And it was pretty interesting seeing the opening talk this morning, how they talked about community, because that's something that we've actually seen within Riot, around having an internal community for application security. So one of the things that Riot really makes us think about, because we've got people spread all around the world, is like, how do we share knowledge with other Rioters? How do we make sure that if we solve a problem in Santa Monica, that the engineers in Seoul know about it and don't have to reinvent the wheel? And so one of the ways that we tried to tackle this was through something called communities of practice. And so we have communities of practice for a really wide range of things in Riot. I lead the application security community of practice. And I suppose the best way to think of that is it's kind of like an OWASP weekend. Because every month We get a room, we get some food, we get some drinks, and we just say, you want to come and talk about security, just come and talk about it. So we don't really have an agenda for that. We'll normally give like a 30-minute talk. So we'll either pick, like here's a quick 30-minute intro on how to get up and running using Burp Suite. One of the ones we gave a talk on was actually content security policy to our engineers. So sometimes they'll suggest things they'd like to see from us, other times we'll come along with something, but it's only 30 minutes. The meeting is 90 minutes, we talk for 30. And then what we do for the rest of the meeting, largely as a security team, is just shut up. We stop trying to tell teams how to do security, we just listen to them. What is it that they want to ask us about? What problems do they have that they want our opinion on? And so think about it, how many times do you make a lot of your security team available to engineers just to come and talk to? And I'm not talking about like after you've done a threat modeling exercise or when you're raising vulnerabilities with them. I just mean like an OWASP. Let them come along and speak and listen to them. And so as I said, it actually told us about the times that we should shout. So like when we publish a secure coding standard, for example, and when we should shut up. Like in these meetings, where we should just be quiet and listen to our engineers. And actually I did very similar at lunch because one of our senior software engineers has come to this this conference. And I did the same at lunch. I just listened to the things that he needs from AppSec to progress from where they are now to where they need to be. So sometimes you just have to listen. So think about it, you know, when was the last time that you made yourself or your team available to anyone in the company just come and talk? If it's never, I would recommend that you try and do it, because it's been very valuable to us. And the reason we did this first was because it allowed me to listen to what engineers in Riot thought about AppSec and why some of the things in the past hadn't worked and what we could do for them to help them adopt our AppSec ideas going forward. Okay, so we hold these meetings every month, same time, same room, so everyone knows where it is. But we also have a very active mailing list as well. So we have a mailing list, AppSec at riotgames.com, for people to subscribe to internally and talk about AppSec. So we share knowledge with engineers through this, so like some of the talks at this conference, when the videos are published, we'll share them via that mailing list. So this isn't mandatory for anyone. These are people in Riot who want to be a security champion, who want to know more about it. And because they come to us and they partake in that community, we want to make sure that they get everything that we can give them for them to go away and be a security champion for us. So it's something I would highly recommend. And so what the community allowed us to do was to kind of build that respect and that partnership with engineering teams in Riot. So this is Leona and Ari. We did a cinematic called New Dawn. And basically, at the end of it, they had to fight together to be successful. And it's similar when we're trying to produce this secure code. We as an AppSec team cannot make secure code happen by ourselves. And to some degree, those engineering teams can't do it without us giving them what they need, the help they need, the guidance, the tools, and so on. So we have to work together. So those community practice meetings allowed us to identify those writers who were enthusiastic about AppSec, who were writing code within Riot that we could work closely with to start building secure experiences for our players. And we're building those relationships. There are a lot of teams now that involve us significantly earlier in their development process than they used to in the past, because we've earned that trust and that respect and built those relationships with them. One of the other benefits to us was, now obviously a lot of you probably know that there's a lot of good that can come from adding AppSec into your QA process. What we found from this was that those QA engineers who really wanted to break stuff, really wanted to find security vulnerabilities, came to these meetings and said, teach me how to break things, teach me how to find security vulnerabilities. And in exchange, what we learned was about all the cool automated tools that they already have in place. That's some really cool stuff to test the game in the game server. And actually one of the things I'm working on in my current sprint is actually adding security tests to that. So we learned a lot from them, and they're hopefully learning a lot from us. So again, it doesn't take too much time, really, and it doesn't take too much effort. But we've seen a lot of benefits from this. Actually, one thing before I forget, we've actually seen software engineers answer other software engineers' AppSec questions before the security team can get to them. And we saw, like, I was going to talk about an example from a few months back until something happened just yesterday morning on our AppSec mailing list. A software engineer from one part of Riot came along and said, look, I'm developing this thing, I need to store these sensitive tokens, and I'm thinking about doing it in this way. what do you think of that? Before anyone in the security team could respond, one of these other security engineers, one of these other engineers who has that strong interest in AppSec answered that question correctly before any of the security team got to it. Now see, to me, that means this approach is working. And it's not the first example of that. As I said, I was going to talk about a different example until this happened yesterday morning. But really what we want to make sure we're doing is not building kind of isolated pockets of AppSec excellence within engineering. We want to make sure that if we help one team do something cool from an AppSec point of view, that everyone gets to know about it. And so we want to move away from that sharing nothing to sharing everything. Or actually, ideally, engineers sharing that information with other engineers. Because that is going to have a bigger impact than the security team trying to convince other engineers to do something. And so we're not all the way over there yet, not by a long way, but we're certainly not here either. We're somewhere on the way. And just having those meetings and that mailing list has played a big part in that. And so, after we placed those AppSec boards and we figured out where our problems were, and we started having those community meetings and we started listening to those engineers and figuring out what help they wanted from us, we started to think, well, what should be our next step be? And I think for a lot of people, the next step might have been, let's do formal AppSec training. But that isn't what we did next. We wanted to provide secure coding guidance, but not in like the form of a boring kind of standard, kind of secure coding standard. Because we listened to our engineers about what kind of guidance they wanted from us. You know, and they didn't want like a big waffly standard talking about this is SQL injection, this is what it is, blah, 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 and then a little bit at the bottom telling them how to go and prevent it. That wasn't going to work. Our engineers already told us that. And they told us, don't write it in Word documents because we're not going to read it. Where do your software engineers go normally when they want to learn about things or share knowledge? It's not Word, right? They're going to use things like Confluence. And if you don't move your AppSec guidance and all those kind of things that you want them to read about AppSec into those tools, they're not going to read it. Okay? I've made that mistake in the past. Okay? And by speaking with our engineers, we just knew, well, we won't do that. That's not, we shouldn't just give you a Word document or even a PowerPoint training sessions. So I'll touch on a little bit more in a minute exactly what we did with secure coding guidance. But I wanted to talk about kind of a little bit like Niall with his building blocks here. Our kind of 5 building blocks of secure coding guidance. And you can see them down the side. There's secure design, secure coding, secure testing, security reviews, and vulnerabilities. Because no matter what we try and do, we're still going to have vulnerabilities. Right? We're going to have to manage those in a smart way. So the first thing we tried to do was to give engineering teams something that could help them before they started writing code. Like, we have, I think, between 300 and 400 people in the engineering department. We have 23 security people. We can't be involved in everything they do. We can't threat model everything. Out of that 23, I think about 6 are AppSec people at the moment. So we can't scale to be involved in every single development that those teams do. It's not going to work. So we need to try and arm them with things that help them produce secure code. Now, obviously, the immediate thought is, well, you could do some really cool automation stuff and testing and so on. And that's going to be part of it. But sometimes you want to make them think before they start writing any code about how they should build something in a secure way. So the first thing we did was create appsecdesign.riotgames.com. It's not public yet. There's a couple of websites that we have internally, which I do want to make public in the future. But right now, they're internal. So if they go to appsecdesign.riotgames.com, they're taken to a pretty simple checklist. It's 15 questions. It's slightly more if they're doing mobile development. I think it's like another 6 or 7 on the checklist. But it's real simple, very high level. Like, it's a bit more wordy than this, but it's like, are you doing context-specific output coding? You know, it doesn't talk about, you know, are you preventing SQL injection? It's kind of like those principles of secure development. 15 points. Those teams can take it and go run through it without us, and teams do that. And then they only come to us when they're not sure, or they think they're doing something that deviates away from those checklist items, where it's a no, or I'm not quite sure, and then they engage with the security team and we give them some very specific guidance. Actually, my favorite engineering team normally fills in this checklist, and when they come to us for a security review, they give us the checklist, and so we can quickly see, oh yes, it's this class that they're using for this, it's that method they're using for that, and we're like, yeah, they really like that team, and I'm going to talk about them a little bit later on. But the point is real simple. Okay? It's not quite the same as if they had their own AppSec engineer doing threat modeling, all those kind of things at that phase, but it enables them to go away and start producing things in a secure way at least from a high-level design point of view, without needing an AppSec engineer all the time. So it's enabling them to go away and write those secure experiences. So what about secure coding? We already know that we don't have this in Word documents, and it's in Confluence, right? So, as I said before, in Riot, we provide secure coding guidance for about 20 different languages. Not for fun, because we need to. So we have, obviously, a lot of C++ code, probably unsurprisingly because of the game. We have PHP, and then we have some slightly crazy things like Erlang, because we use eJabba for our chat system. So we've got a lot of nice Erlang in there, for example. So there's a lot of different languages that we need to provide secure coding guidance for. And then within each one of those languages, you can imagine we have PHP developers, how many different frameworks are those developers potentially using, and so on. So we provide guidance for, as far as we know anyway, every language and every framework that's used by software engineers within Riot. And so, as I said before, it's not waffling. You know, when they go to that page, they don't see a big wall of text on like, these are all the vulnerabilities and these are all the things that can go wrong. We just say, look, you know those points that we had on that checklist there, those 15 things? Here's how you implement them in your language. So when they go to securecoding.riotgames.com, they just see a pretty simple page with a list of languages. They pick the language they're working in, and then they'll see guidance for that language that helps them implement all those checklist items. And it's not wording, it's code. They see code samples when they go to that page. And they see recommendations on libraries. And the coolest thing is when an engineering team come back to us and say, actually, we've got an even cooler library that we use for this. Can you update that page and refer to this instead? Yes, absolutely, we can do that. But the point is, if those engineers, and you see that they're building very high scale things, they've got a lot of things they need to develop. So you want to make sure that they don't have to spend a lot of time figuring out how to do security. So we can give them all that information about all the different types of vulnerabilities and training courses and so on, but they don't want that when they're just trying to figure out, well, I've just written this web form, how can I do it securely? They just want to know how to do it quickly. So if they go to that page, we don't just tell them about what they should do, we tell them, or give them recommendations on how they should do it. What library, what method they should use, and so on. So that's been very valuable to us, and as I said, engineers often give us feedback on how we can improve those pages as well. So security testing, I suppose we're approaching them in a few different ways. So the first way, again, is I guess kind of like a checklist. That one of the things that I did when I got to Riot was basically document my start to finish process of doing a security test of a web application on a web service. Wrote it all down, right away from how to configure your browser to use Burp Suite through to how to test for DOM-based cross-site scripting, and here's how to use this tool to do that, or here's the security test inputs that we would normally use to test for SQL injection. Very, very detailed step-by-step list. And we said, like, this is something that's essentially a procedure for our security engineers now. But everyone else in Riot, all you guys who write software, if you want to know how to try and break your stuff, feel free to go through that checklist. And again, my favorite engineering team often completes this checklist and then comes back to us and says, well, yeah, here's everything we saw when we tried to run these tests. Or these ones are not applicable because, well, we don't use SQL, for example, so they don't need to do SQL injection testing. And so that obviously allows those engineers to learn more about how to break things. And then they learn how to hopefully build things more securely from them. But it also allows them to security test for themselves. So one of the other things we did on that was to give them training on the tools that we use as a security team. So we've run classes on tools like Burp Suite. Those classes are recorded and then available to any writer around the world to view that afterwards. And so we said that we've given you this process to follow and these tools to use, and we're going to train you on how to use them. Go ahead and use them. And so engineers have done that. We want to get a lot better in this area. And as I said earlier, one of the things I'm working on literally in this current sprint is modifying one of the existing tools that QA have for automating game server testing and adding security testing into them. So we want to train them on these security tools, but what I see Jeff Williams at the back, a lot of stuff he's talking about is like get this security stuff into their part of the process. And that's what we're trying to do now. Is, if all the engineers who do game client server development use this tool that QA gave them, why on earth would I try and give them a separate security tool to do that testing? they're going to run that every night or whatever frequency they run it on. So let's just add security into it. And it's really cool, actually. I'm really enjoying working on that with them. And then security reviews. It's slightly similar to security testing. Like, we come charging in like right guys up there and start shooting up the place and wrecking their applications, finding vulnerabilities. Hopefully not, actually, if they've done everything else right. But when I talk about security reviews, this is where we do testing for them or code reviews for them. So we're not involved in every little change that goes live. And we could, even if we wanted to, we can't scale to that kind of size, right? We do like hundreds of builds per day across all the various products. We can't be involved in every single one, at least not from a human point of view, bringing that human AppSec excellence to that review. So what tends to happen is we're involved more in the really high-profile changes. So some of you who follow League of Legends, you'll know that we launched a merchandise store November last year. So the team working on that involved us from the very beginning. And we help them do all the things that you'd expect a team to do, you know, security involved in design review, code reviews, testing, external pen tests, blah, blah, blah. So, like I said, we want to enable those teams to do secure development and secure releases without us most of the time. And only involve us where it's those real kind of high risk or high profile things. So, there's not too much to talk about in the security review bit because it's the stuff that most of you are probably familiar with. Doing security code reviews, security testing, some external pen testing, depending on how big of a change or how important a change it is. But you know, really the point is we're not involved in everything. We're involved in the things that are really important. And then the last thing is vulnerabilities. Right? No matter if engineers did everything else that's good, we're going to have to deal with security vulnerabilities at some point. Whether it's in AppSec, whether it's the infrastructure, whether it's the underlying server OS has a vulnerability in it, we're going to have to deal with vulnerabilities. So one of the things we did with this was to stop hiding vulnerability data. Everyone in engineering can go and view every single vulnerability that we've tracked in the past year. So we moved this into Jira, and we have a project that's creatively named vulnerabilities. And every single vulnerability, every single InfoSec vulnerability in Riot is now in this project. So we put things in that project, doesn't matter who reports it, whether it's a bug bounty program, whether it's internal security review, whatever it is, it goes in there. So we create a ticket in that project, we assign it to the product owner for whatever has a vulnerability. And so one of two things happens there. Normally that product owner creates a linked ticket in their own team's backlog and has the link and we can track it that way. Or sometimes they just manage it through our own project. So what are the values, what value do we get out of that? The first thing, we don't hide vulnerability data anymore. You know, there's not like some black magic going on where no one sees what goes on when something is vulnerable. That doesn't happen anymore. If you're an engineer, you can see the vulnerabilities that everyone has had in this past year, and we'll be doing that ongoing. Secondly, it makes it very easy to start using that data. Jira has a lot of nice things built in around reporting and metrics. So we can start looking at things like which team takes the longest to close vulnerabilities, which is always quite interesting. But then secondly, because we're pulling in data from many different sources, whether it's pen test results, it's HackerOne with bug bounty and a few other places, because we can see that kind of centralized view of vulnerabilities across different properties, we can start using that data in cool ways. So we found that some of our engineers in one of our regions had a bigger problem preventing cross-site scripting than anywhere else. And because we could see that from that data in that vulnerability project, it meant that when we went to do our AppSec training with the engineers in that region, we could tailor it for their needs. You know, if they were having a bigger problem with cross-site scripting than engineers in Santa Monica, for example, well then we could focus a bit more on how to prevent cross-site scripting and how to prevent it in the languages that they develop. Okay, so it's been really powerful for us. One of the other things that we did, and I think that slide doesn't do it justice actually. I have a printed card of this if you want to take a look at it after. The colours are a lot nicer. So within our engineering department, when I first went to Santa Monica, I noticed that our engineers had this card on their desk called the definition of done. It's this kind of size. And it was basically a card that they looked at when they finished writing their code to see whether they were done based on our definition of done. So certain things to do with checking in code and versioning and all those kind of things. I said, well, for every engineer already checks that card on their desk and familiar with doing that, why don't we give them a security card? And so this is our definition of secure code. Now, it doesn't cover everything. You're not going to see every single vulnerability type covered on there, and that's on purpose. We don't want like a massive poster that they have to deal with. It's a little card that engineers all around the world have on their desk. This and the secure coding guidance on securecoding.riotgames.com is currently being all translated into Korean by our InfoSec guys in Korea for the engineers there. But otherwise, everyone has this card. And it's not supposed to cover everything. It's supposed to cover the things that we think are the most important, or the things that have really caused us problems in the past. And then if they want more information, they can go to those two internal websites I told you about, AppSecDesign.riotgames.com and SecureCoding.riotgames.com. And I think the point on the bottom is possibly the most important one. One of our principles of engineering at Riot is this concept of total ownership. You write it, you own it. All the way through the production. If there's anything that goes wrong in production, and it's code you wrote, you need to fix it, unless you've handed it over to someone else. So we piggybacked on that. You know, if you write something that has a security vulnerability on this live, we're going to come and speak to you about that when it comes to having a fix. Okay, so this is something that's piggybacked on a few existing ideas within engineering. You know, we piggybacked on an engineering-wide principle of total ownership, and we piggybacked on something that we know engineers already check and already have on their desk. It's a little card that helps them understand when things are complete, when they're done. And that didn't cost us much money. I think there was like about €500. I'm not sure what that is in dollars, but it was about €500 to have those printed, and we distributed to engineers all around the world. So it's very low cost, but it's very effective. And so on the guidance side of things, we can't kind of see the victory screen and the confetti. So this is actually one of the professional teams of the North American League of Legends called Cloud9. And for those of you who follow us, yes, we've not had the best of starts this year. But in this case, they're victorious. No, as a security team, we can't start to celebrate and say we've been victorious yet when it comes to guidance, because we know we've got a long way to go. But we are seeing small things happening that we should celebrate. And so one of the things that has been really cool recently is one of the engineers that's been really enthusiastic about security, particularly the guy I mentioned before who's at this conference, that we've worked with. He was one of the first guys that came to us when we started doing community stuff 12 months ago. So we worked with him on a lot of things over the past year, and he has listened to everything that we talked about when it comes to AppSec. And so one of the things he was working on was creating a new way of doing authentication and authorization for Riot web properties, and I think the game in the future. And so one of the cool things about that was he didn't just tackle the authentication and authorization problem. He thought about, if I want other teams to use this and do authentication and authorization in this way, what can I give them for free to convince them that there's more benefit than just authentication and authorization? And so what he did is he built in a ton of security stuff into that. The teams will just get for free going forward. They don't need to think about it. Rate limiting, validating player-supplied data, you know, the correct level of login that the security team want, secure session management, and so on. Those teams no longer need to worry about this if they use his way of doing authentication and authorization. And that's really one of the things that we're trying to focus on more. You know, we talked about earlier about sharing that knowledge out through those teams. He had the knowledge. Now all those other teams can learn it, or they don't necessarily need to learn it. And so, you know, I've been asked in the past week to review 2 new web applications being developed that are using this approach. And so for me as a security person, I know that they're already doing a lot of things securely because I've reviewed the new authentication and authorization stuff. And so that engineer did a lot of other cool things. So one of the things that he also did was, when we created our secure coding standard towards the back end of last year, he was like, you know what you should do, all you other engineers who are reading the standard, you should create an artifact that you deploy as part of your development, and you share with the security team that actually explains how you have or haven't implemented every one of those security requirements. So now when we check out his code, we can open the file called security, and there's every one of our secure coding requirements listed in there, and he explains whether they've implemented it or not, why they haven't been able to implement it, and what they're going to do about that in the future. So he is telling other engineers to do that. I'm loving it because it makes my reviews easier, but he is championing those things for us. And that all comes back to those community efforts that we talked about earlier on. And then similar, again, I just wanted to touch on vulnerabilities again, because those things in the game are the wards. You know, the wards I talked about right at the start, that's what they look like. And so, as I said, this has allowed us to increase visibility on vulnerabilities in the business. And that's been really important from a few points of view because it's allowed us to communicate vulnerabilities in a way that actually shares knowledge. Like we don't just go along and say you've got a SQL injection vulnerability, fix it. We actually talk in a lot of detail about what has been found, why that's a problem. We added a field to the form to give them like a severity rating. And actually, when we have if we have really excellent reports from people through like bug bounty programs, we'll include that full report and even proof of concept code that we've got. So the engineers can go and look at that ticket and they not only know they've got a problem to fix, but they learn about that type of vulnerability, why it happened, and then what they should do in the future to stop it happening. So it's not just about getting nice metrics to do with vulnerabilities. You can use those things as a way of educating people as well, and that's what we try to do. And so one of the things that we're working a lot on is data. And so this is a pretty cool video that shows how data can reveal patterns in League of Legends. So you watch one game where it's like 10 players, and you don't really notice too many patterns, but when you have 10,000 games at the same time with 100,000 players, you'll see there are certain patterns, right? Where players go, where they fight, where they play in the game. And it's very similar to what Alex said in his keynote this morning, right? If you watch one player in League of Legends, you might not pick up on things. You watch it from that high level, you can pick up on a lot of things. And it's the same with these vulnerabilities. If you view like one vulnerability in isolation, like cross-site scripting vulnerability in one of our websites, you miss a lot of things. When you have that vulnerability project and you can view all the cross-site scripting vulnerabilities across all of our web properties, you start to see patterns. Like we saw a pattern. We had all these cross-site scripting vulnerabilities, but a large majority of them were from one team in one specific region. So that allowed us to target our training with those guys. And I've seen a few people mention this in talks today around, doing things, smart things with data. It came up in the content security policy talk earlier around like how do you get that data together, what dashboards and so on out there. And you see a lot of companies talk about the cool stuff they've done in that space, but they don't really share that with anyone. So one of the things we're starting to work on in the security team is to write a dashboard for application security, monitoring, and all those good things, visualization. And when we're further along, we're going to open source that and give it to people to use. Because one of my frustrations was I see cool conference talks and other AppSec security teams, and they show off this cool stuff they've got, and it's like, oh yeah, but that's just for our team to use. It doesn't really help other teams, build their AppSec program that way. So when we are a bit further along with that, it'll be a bit later this year, but when we're a bit further along that, we plan to open source that. Hopefully people will find it useful, because if any interest in that, I know similar questions have come up in the content security policy talk earlier about what kind of tools are out there to help people with these things. We found that there wasn't really much out there, so we're going to make them and share them with everyone who needs that help. Training, as I said with AppSec training, it wasn't one of the first things that we tried to tackle, because we could have just gone in and said, like, we'll give everyone an OWASP top 10 training, but that, in hindsight, really wasn't what our engineers needed, so that's not what we did. What we did first was, those things of listening to our engineers, give them the kind of guidance they wanted, understand what kind of vulnerabilities we actually have in our software, and understand what things were difficult for them, what vulnerabilities were difficult to understand, what types of controls were maybe difficult for them to implement or test for. And then we decided we would give them training. So one of the goals very early on, I know I didn't go through it in detail, but one of the goals early on, we said that we were going to develop and implement an application security program delivered by internal staff and leading industry experts. So like anyone involved in OWASP knows Jim Manico. So we brought Jim Manico in to help us with some of this. So we had Jim, we flew Jim here to LA to train some of our engineers, we flew him to St. Louis, train engineers there, but we also recorded everything, well with Jim, maybe not everything he said in those training courses. We recorded most of what Jim said in those training courses, and then we shared that with everyone around the world. Everyone in Riot has access to that anytime they want. A full one-day training course from Jim Manico. And then on top of that, the internal training is something that we've focused on a lot last year, and I'll touch on a little bit towards the end of the talk what we're trying to do going forward. But what we wanted to do is make sure that we weren't just giving engineers like a one time off, once a year, 1 day in a training course, because that doesn't really work. A few jobs ago I was a full-time technical trainer. People stopped listening after a certain while. Some of you might have already started listening to me as well, hopefully not. But after a certain period of time, we stopped listening. We can't take things in as well. So we don't give long training courses. 30 minutes is generally the most that we do. We'll pick a very specific topic and talk about it. And like I said, we do that every month. Every single month, one of our security team delivers one of those 30-minute talks to our community. It's recorded, and then everyone in the company can view it whenever they want to view it. We have run other classes outside of those as well, so like the Burp Suite class I mentioned before, that was actually a 1-hour class, where we didn't try and turn them into a pen tester or a Burp Suite expert. We just said, look, you want to get up and running using Burp Suite for testing web applications, here's kind of the minimum you need to know in a 1-hour session. And again, we recorded it, and anyone in work can go and do that. They don't just have to be an engineer, or they don't have to come to the class. Any time in the future, someone can go and do that. So what I would say in training is to try and focus a little less on like those 1 or 2 days in classroom style training, and try and figure out how you can do kind of almost continual knowledge sharing. Like obviously the Holy Grail, and there are some people out there with kind of things like this, the Holy Grail is to get right in front of them in their IDE as they're writing code. We're not at that point for sure, but like those are the kind of places that we want to lead with this knowledge. But really the point is, less of the really long 1 or 2 day stuck in the classroom type courses, focus on like that continual smaller chunks of knowledge over time. And so RFCs, this guy here is called Mundo, Dr. Mundo again, that's his corporate Mundo scheme. So in the corporate world, or at least where I come in financial services, Mundo would have been able to help us with these standards, because he would have written this top-down standard and said, well, you people writing code, yeah, that's the way you're supposed to write code going forward. That's not the way we work in life. So everyone's, obviously familiar with this concept of RFCs out there on the internet. We essentially have the same process internally. So we use RFCs to increase, visibility and knowledge, of the technical decisions being made by others in engineering. Right? And so we have security RFCs. So we have security RFCs for things like cryptography, secure coding, how to build a brand new office in a secure way, and others. But where the difference is instead of us as a security team coming to someone and saying, this is how you should write secure code, we propose the initial RFC of, this is how we think you should write secure code. And I suppose, putting it politely, engineering came along and ripped apart my RFC and said, no, this is how we're going to write secure code. We weren't way off, but there are a lot of things that they knew as the people who actually write that C++ game code, for example, that what we were asking for there was not going to work, or actually this was a better way of doing it. So what happens with all RFCs, not just our security ones, is you propose something, people who are interested in that come along, they give you lots of feedback, suggest changes, suggest things to add, and so on, and then you end up with, I suppose, what is a standard created by collaboration. And then everyone who is involved in helping you create that standard then is a champion of that standard. So that RFC was created largely in conjunction with, director level people within engineering, with software engineers, throughout the different areas of engineering, and now we have a secure coding standard that we created as an engineering department, not something that the security team tried to say, you should go and follow this. Okay, so there's a difference.
Can you give a quick example of what an RFC might cover? Like the scope of it?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing actually. So the RFCs can have different scopes. So like you can have a wide scope, or you can have like a League of Legends scope, or just web scope. So it depends on what exactly you're writing for. For our secure coding standard, we went for like this is a high level how to write secure code across all of our different types of products and have a wide scope. I think where that will go is we'll have smaller scope, maybe product-specific secure coding RFCs, because the coding that like League of Legends as a game will do is very significant to League of Legends, the website. So yeah, I think that's where those will go throughout this year. But the initial iteration was like, this is the right wide scope on how to write secure code. And so then one of the things we started thinking about towards the end of last year was how do we start rewarding people for helping us level up application security, right? So there's two different angles to this. There's the internal rewards and an external rewards program. And Kate is sitting there, so I should mention HackerOne as our external way of rewarding people. So we launched a bug bounty program and announced that, I think it was November last year. And so the bug bounty program was a way, obviously, for us to invite people who are finding bugs in not just our web properties, but in our game as well. So not kind of functional kind of bugs within the game, but bugs that could be abused to give a negative player experience to every other player in the game. And so I think where our bug bounty program is maybe a little bit different to everyone else's, our scope is kind of everything, really. We don't just say, oh, it's that website and that website. And really our stance is if we have to make a code or configuration change to remove that vulnerability, you're more than likely going to get a bug bounty payout on that. So we don't have a really restricted scope. We go big. It's like, if you can find a vulnerability in something, then it's eligible. So we've had bounties submitted in infrastructure, in web properties, in the game itself. Some really cool ones in the game I don't think I'm allowed to talk about, but some really cool ones there that if you're on the receiving end of those as a player, you wouldn't have a pleasant experience as a player.
Just a quick question. Can you give a rough idea of what your budget is on a yearly basis?
I don't know the budget. Someone one me manages that. I can tell you that we've paid out over $130,000 so far since we started it. And we do see a lot of the same problems that Alex was talking about this morning around some of the submissions that are kind of, I've run Burp Suite and I'm just sending you the report, and right the way through to the other end of the scale, but there's really, really smart reverse engineering type issues that we looked at and thought, wow, that's really impressive. So yeah, a lot of the same things that Alex talked about this morning, we've seen the same kind of things since we launched that as well. Yeah, about $130,000 since we launched it. I should have said actually at the start, that trophy there is our World Championship trophy, and that's Samsung White when they won it last year. You can see it's pretty big. It actually weighs over 60 pounds, so it's actually a really big trophy. Those 5 young guys, you can see it took all 5 of them to lift it up. So just like winning the game, you need your whole team to be able to lift up the trophy at the end of it as well. There's quite an interesting story behind that on, I think it's on the New York Times website. Basically, we sent off this design of what we wanted, it came back and it was over 70 pounds. And we're like, no, you've got to trim that down a bit. They trimmed it down and it still was like over 60 pounds. And we're like, it looks cool, so we'll stick with it. But yeah, it's a massive trophy.
Have you seen a reduction in items that are having to do with perhaps issues started training?
Not really yet, because we only launched the bug bounty program like 2 months ago. It did allow us to, I suppose, have some more of that targeted training via that and the vulnerability project. And we've seen then a reduction in those types of vulnerabilities. But yeah, I think it's a little bit too early for us to say with it only been a couple of months there. But because of the way we're trying to use that data to be more focused on what tools we give teams, what guidance, what training and so on, I think that it will lead to less bugs. And so for internal stuff, we want to reward rioters who do things excellent from a security point of view. And so one of the things that we created for them was this t-shirt. And so no one in the security team or anyone associated with security can have this t-shirt in Riot. The only way you can get this is if someone nominates you for doing something cool from a security point of view. Right, so this champion here is Nar. Remember the little guy before with the dragon, he was playing with his little building blocks? He's this kind of little cute champion most of the time, but then when he gets mad, he turns into this big crazy thing. And so that was kind of what we were thinking, right? Every rioter is doing their normal rioter thing, they see a security threat, get big and angry, and it's not a problem anymore. Right? And some people went crazy over these, people want these t-shirts, but we've only given like 15 t-shirts out to like the 1,500 plus people in Riot. And a couple of them have been for AppSec, so this isn't just an AppSec specific review, but a couple of them have been for AppSec. So like we've had the engineer that I was talking about who's at this conference today, he's done a lot of cool things that I talked about in this talk. So we gave him this t-shirt. We had another engineer who got, I should say, he's not actually a software engineer. He wrote an internal tool for generating these codes that we give away at conferences like this and games conferences. He's not a software engineer. He came to us and said, can you review this site for me? And it was perfect from an AppSec point of view. And I was like, how did you do that? And he was just like, I thought that's the way you're supposed to write code. And I was like, okay, don't tell everyone that because I'll be out of a job. But you're right, that's the way to write that code. And so I was like, man, you deserve this t-shirt because you're doing an excellent thing there. It's like those things that people do in Riot that it's not things you just expect them to do as part of their job. It's times like that where you go, yeah, that's actually really impressive. That is how you should write that code. And go and tell all the other engineers that because they'll listen to you more than they'll listen to me. And so going forward, some of the things that we're trying to work on. I mentioned the data stuff before. We want to work on this dashboard idea. It's actually one of our highest priorities for this year to get it developed and built and open source to people. And then get other people using that. We want to do more community stuff, both internally because we've seen that being successful, and engaging more with the external community, sharing some of the things that work, coming to these kind of conferences, and learning from everyone else who's trying to do AppSec. Trying to move that guidance forward as well, and automation significantly. Like I said, I've already started to work on some of that. And training, we want to do a lot more stuff for training, moving away from kind of classroom-based training to on-demand training that teams can get, labs that they can download and work with anytime they want, internal CTFs, those kind of things. And so very briefly, my recommendations is really everything I've talked about, right? Set clear goals for your application and security program and publish those to the company. Make sure everyone's aware of what you're trying to achieve. Focusing on enabling engineers to write secure code rather than blocking them and disabling them and saying no to things. Focus on your knowledge share and doing that on a kind of continuous basis instead of those long classroom-based things. And then speak to your engineers. Find out what it is they need or want from you to be able to write secure code. And then I suppose like other people in this conference, I should point out that we are trying to hire lots of security people. All in our offices all around the world and in pretty much every area of security you can think of. So, does anyone have any questions? Or have I run out of time?
We don't have time for questions, but you guys can take them off.
Okay, thank you everyone.
Good